split your course up into the different units, and then each site is going to be based on a different unit. Okay, that's my plan. Whereas when I first started using Google Sites, which was, about 3 years ago, okay, I actually just created one site and then plowed everything into that one site, which made it very unwieldy and quite difficult to actually find anything in. So I'm hoping that the idea of having the separate unit-based sites is a more approachable way for you to be able to access the materials. So for the example of the pathway exam one, because I got asked about it the other day, within it is your pathway questions and information about the exam, summaries, the videos. I've also added in there, this is a new one that I added in, and that's a revision slide based on those introductory concepts. So it just goes through the economic problem, the definitions, economics as a social science, the TPF curve, all of those concepts, they're in there. Okay? I thought that was a good one to do. So review videos, etc., are all there. Now these should be all the slides. Now if I've missed a slide, and hopefully I haven't, then it should appear. I should be able to find it. If not, I can add them in. So behavioural economics, circular flow, nudge theory, so they're all there. Utility experiment, and then the video as well. So they should all be there. Yeah. There is also the introduction site. There's also the introduction website, and that should have the slides from that introduction topic too. Okay, as well. Are there any questions about the sites? Now, yes.
The introduction site.
Yes, unit 1. Yeah, sorry, unit 1. The one thing I won't know, okay, and this I will rely on you for this. Okay, the one thing I won't know, because all of this material is stuff I have gathered and I have put together and changed and chopped and changed over the years. Yeah. So I won't know if I have always changed the settings so that you can access it. So there is a chance that there will be something you will find in the site and go, oh, I want to see that. And you can't because the settings aren't right. Okay, if that happens, that's okay. Just send me an email, let me know what the resource is that you're trying to access, and then I'll go back into it and change the settings. All right. I have had that with another site of mine where pretty much all of the resources, the settings were all wrong. All right. Also, the sites themselves, you have to be careful about accessing the sites, particularly if you are a distance learner. I try and put them onto public, but they actually default to Nexus only. So if you are accessing the sites from who knows where, so our distance learners, for example, might have been, then they may not have been able to access the actual site themselves. And similarly, the things within the sites as well might be limited to Nexus only. Okay, so that's that one that I wanted to have a go through with you. Now, I've also posted to you this morning. I think I went through this morning. All right, this is a graphic organizer. Yes, it is easier in the dark. I'm in dark mode. Cool. Look at that. That's pretty cool. All right, dark mode. Fantastic. Now, the idea of graphic organizers, and I've done a lot over the years with graphic organizers, is that it puts the information all in one place. Okay, and it's not. It doesn't work for everybody. Okay? But what it means is that you can have the diagrams and you can have the definitions and you can have, you know, the explanations, and it can all fit, say, within one space. So I've arranged this. It's actually A3 size. Okay? So if you do go to print it, please understand that. Okay? And it's that way, horizontal way. Okay? Now, what I thought for today was it's good to do a bit more reviewing, okay, I thought. And if you had particular questions about any aspects that we've gone through, we can go through those. If you think, no, we're sorted, yeah, that's fine, then we'll just press on and keep going with the content, okay? So what would you like to do? I've got you that. You could work through that. There's the revision slides. We could work through those.
Economics as a science.
Yes. Yes, we could do that. Okay. Yes, you can. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, one more time. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's in the classroom, so you should be able to access that one. I've got a few other ones that are old, and they're also, I need to redesign those, and they're also based on the old units. Okay, so I'm going to need to change the content and the layout of them, which is a bit tricky because they're also based on Microsoft Word, which means that the formatting goes all kablooey when I try and change them, but that's all right. No panicking. Right, so have a go, perhaps at this, okay? Have a go, we'll have a wee conversation. I'll put some stuff up here and we can have a wee conversation, okay? If you have online distance learners, if you have particular questions, chuck them in and they can pop up and we'll just work our way through them, okay? Now, it is a bit of a mad year, 2020, as you understand. And you all coming back, you have survived a half a term, which is good. We have collectively lasted half a term. We haven't had to lock down or any of those sorts of things. You're all doing fantastic with the, I was going to say keeping the masks on, and then I look at Kendrick. All right, and the following the social distancing and all of that sort of idea. It's not particularly easy, all sorted, and you have achieved it. So that's, you know, you do deserve a pat on the back, and you've got a whole week off, so that's going to give you some mental pause, which will be good for you. I thought you might like some sugar. So, jealous much? Now, of course, social distancing rules still apply. So when the plate arrives at your desk, you need to know ahead of time which chocolate you are going to choose.
That's so scary.
Okay, and choose that, and don't randomly touch all of the chocolates going, no, I don't want this one, no, I'm going to lick that one and put it back. You know? Okay, none of that sort of stuff, all right?
Oh, I accidentally touched all
Okay, Mr. Randomly touching everything on my desk. Yeah. So have a think as to what chocolate you would like, and then pick up the plate. Yeah, and pass the plate onto the next desk. All right. And then, of course, they're getting really close to peer at the chocolates. That's an interesting idea. Quite like having that.
Yeah, they're so good.
All right. So the first thing that you think of when you think of the difference between science, the sciences, and the social science, one of the big keys is the methodology. All right. The idea that we looked at with regards to the hypothesis, the idea of testing, right? The idea of coming cause and refutation, principle of refutation. So can we prove it or not? Okay. So in the what are they called? Physical sciences, natural sciences. Those subjects have very strict rules with all of these. Okay, and it is a really rigorous, hopefully, process. In economics, because we're dealing with behavior, we are still thinking all of that, but we have to take into account the idea of rationality, right? Or if you like, bounded rationality, which we now talk about. Rationality. We need to consider that there are some decisions, right, that it is not going to be possible to refute. Okay, there are some actions, some economic processes that just won't, you won't be able to test them. Okay? Yeah. Or if you can, there's that idea of repeatability. All right, and that's something that was discussed in that article I mentioned before, because if you link this to this, all right, the idea is that because you are now knowledgeable about DD, specifically nudge and choice architecture.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, sir.
No problem.
Are they going to
Sorry, one more time.
Don't do that.
Okay. All right. If you are now, as consumers and producers, you are much more savvy, understanding, knowledgeable about nudge theory, behavioral economics, all of those sorts of things. So therefore, all of the testing, the laws that we create, can we actually repeat them? Is it possible to repeat them? Because you know what the trick is. You know you are being influenced. Yeah. So whereas with the, I've forgotten, natural sciences, yeah, if you're testing some sort of physics law, dropping things, I don't know, whatever it is that you do in physics, chemistry stuff, the different chemicals you don't know that they're being experimented on. Yeah. And it'll be the same for the psychologies. It'll be the same for the other human sciences. They will have the same sorts of problems. Yeah. We've also had, as we discussed, we've also had the idea of paradigm shifts. Does it have an N on the end? N? No. Right. Which is the old-fashioned way of saying revolution. All right, so we had the classical, we had the Keynesian, well, we've got Keynesian, we've got marginal thinking, and you've also got your Marxist thinking, all right, and more. Circular economy, behavioral economics.
So all of this affects methodology that
Yes.
not be repeated.
Yes, it does, but it's also the difference because we've had all of these different revolutions. If you have a look at science, the other sciences, yes, they've had revolutions, they have. Right, good old Copernicus and all of those other sorts of things, opening up the understanding of the atom, right, all of that, but not like this. But these were complete changes in thinking. I mean, yes, you can make an argument about Copernicus, I guess, complete change in thinking. But it's a complete philosophical change. And so therefore, the arguments that are being made, they're different. The models that they're going to be using, different. The methodology is going to be very similar, perhaps, but you've got branches of economics that are going to be opposing each other. Whereas with the normal science, I don't know the normal sciences, the natural sciences, do they have branches that are so philosophically different from each other that they're going to clash with each other? I don't know. I would imagine it would be the case. But, yeah. 2 women just got awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Did you see that? That's pretty impressive. Nobel Prize in Economics will be coming out soon. Oh, good. Please need one. Oh, no. Yeah. Yeah, the nudge theory, so aspects of the history we were talking about, like we did the other day, where there's the revolutions. Okay? The understanding of a philosophical change and the impact that then has on the theories that come out. But then your behavioral economics, almost all of that unit is HL. So yeah, that's it. Okay? We are starting the market model, yes, because we have to keep teaching. Yep. But no, the market model is not in the pathway exam. It could have been, but when I did the planning, planned to get to here. Didn't. You have to write the exam before you get to the point. Yeah. So I wrote the exam up to the behavioral economics because that's where I thought we'd get to, and that's where we did. So, yeah. All right. Say it again. It's in the list of things to look at. Yeah. I would suggest look at the list of things to look at. Does that helpful?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very. Just summarizing.
The methodology is for national science students. The hypothesis testing involves
Yeah.
national science.
But economics uses that
Yep.
and uses the language of that, but we don't use it exactly the same as with the natural sciences, and you can't for a lot of it.
That's how they're similar.
It's a 10-mark question and a 15-mark question.
Oh,
Yeah, so your 10-mark question would be something along the lines of explain how a free market economy answers a free economic question. It's a 10-mark question, whereas a 15-mark one should use its values. So if you evaluate this, 3 marks and then its values. Yeah. So you're using those evaluation skills. You're being so the 10-mark questions are very much about stating the obvious, explaining the theory, whereas the 15-mark ones are about that extension into evaluative skill. All right, so we say the theory is this, but, or however, and then you talk about the impact on stakeholders possibly. You might talk about short and long term, particularly when we're dealing with policies. Right? You might say, well, these are what I've said, these are the arguments I'm making, but this argument is more important than that argument. Showing that your thought process is at a higher level. And real life examples are vital.
So is this a summary of the difference? Does this make sense?
Do you want to?
Yeah, so you've got to have this idea about bounded rationality. Yeah. So the idea was your classical thinkers had this idea that everybody was rational. Yeah. Then, right, when you had issues with that, well, we don't know. Right? Because they're behaving irrationally, so therefore we have no model to explain that. Then you had the behavioralists who come in and say, okay, maybe not rational, but maybe rational within boundaries. Yeah, or rational because they're using the heuristics, because they have biases. They're behaving rationally because that's the way our brain works. It's just we have to figure out what the pathways are, right? The cognitive biases, how they influence you in order to be able to then predict how they're going to behave.
Right. So for biased rationality, you just say that humans tend to act rational, but sometimes they don't act. Sometimes they don't act rational. So
Sometimes what appears to be irrational behavior is actually rational within limits or rational within the boundaries of your imperfect information. Or because of imperfect information, you are making a decision that appears to be irrational, but you have made that leap because of your particular heuristics. All right? And that makes it, the thinking fast, thinking slow idea. You've made the decision. You've haven't had to do the research, just gone to it. And you are then satisfied with that outcome, even though it's not an optimal outcome. But classical thinking would say that's irrational. You must get the optimal outcome.
Difference of course that is like tension. Like say,
Yeah. You want me to outline the difference between them? Yes?
We're supposed to know that?
What's in the question?
Oh, well, why would you do it?
Class
Right.
the other day. And you researched an individual economist yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So your classical approach, right, which is Smith, Ricardo, right? Malthus, yep. You've got your marginal revolution, but okay, you've got your Marxian thought. Okay, and you've got your Keynesian thought. So as we saw, which that's Keynes. This is the rational man, rational person. The economic actor that is rational. They are the calculators, they are the maximizers, the optimizers, yeah, okay? They are bound by economic laws, and their behavior follows it. All right? To the extent where we say the market fixes itself. Market self-corrects. All right? The market is essentially perfect. The market is the model that is the be-all and end-all. We refer back to, no, the market says, but the market says. Yeah, that's classical thinking. Now, you don't have to go into the new classical thinkers. You don't have to worry about the post-classical thinkers. You don't have to, all of the slight nuances of that, you really don't have to worry about, okay? Yes, I did try and touch the screen on my Mac to change it, and it's not a touch screen. Just so used to it. Yep. Okay. Karl Marx, as we saw, he was very upset with the classical economists because you had your capitalist thinking, which led to the idea of stealing value from the labor. So therefore, he proposed social ownership or community ownership. He proposed the idea of producing what people need when they need it, and that's all. All right? That's what he's proposing. Very much a you get what you want at the time you want it, but don't expect it to be, you know, fancy. Okay, because that puts you above someone else. Nobody is above anyone else. That's what he was thinking. And George Orwell's Animal Farm, yeah, that sort of idea. Or the Zootopia movie, yeah, sort of idea. Whereas Keynes suggested that the market fails. Keynes suggests that the government should intervene. Now, a lot of that we are covering next. All right? So, no. No.
These two, the classical and Marxist, like those two I have like to be not.
How do I explain this better than I have? The ideas, yeah? The theories of market failure, the theories of government intervention, we haven't covered that, that's not in the pathway exam. The idea that Keynes says that the government should fix the market, you can refer to in the exam, because that's the big difference between him and them. Yeah.
You can close if you want.
I'm being silly. Yeah. Now, the marginal thinkers, all right, they add mathematics to classical thinking. The marginal people.
Classical, Marxist,
They're the big three.
and marginal, but a little bit off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Marginal is
It's under classical, but
yeah.
just they just add math.
Yes. And essentially what they've done there with adding maths is they are attempting to add that, well, it's all gone, but add that science and rigor to the philosophies of economics. Right? Because Adam Smith was a philosopher. Yeah. Karl Marx essentially is a philosopher. He's not an economist. Not even really a philosopher. Okay. Barely a person. Now, so those would be the big three. When you push it further, which you can do, and we've already mentioned them, right? So you go beyond that thought process, because a lot of this is still, yes, Keynes is saying the government should intervene, okay? But it's still based on classical, all right? It's not until you get the good old behavioral economics thinking that you start saying, well, maybe classical thinking doesn't work. You're not taking into account the ideas of bounded rationality. You've got to plug all of those gaps. And then if you wanted to go a step further again, then you bring up the things like the circular economy, which isn't a circular flow, right, which is about the environment. So if you like green economics, which is, I know you think it's all old hat now, but it is actually new for economics. That is one of the most recent discussions in economics. That and another type which is called donut economics, which discusses inequality, which is another one of your big things. Okay.
These three things as well, the behavior economics.
Yeah, I can't remember the actual phrasing. You have to look at the phrasing. Yeah, it's just how it evolved over time. So it's gone from classical discussions about whether labour has a value and is it being stolen, to should the government intervene because the market isn't working, to discussions about we need to add in psychology into our understanding because consumers, although it appears that they're irrational, they're actually bounded by what information they have, their emotional abilities, emotional intelligence, all of those sorts of ideas. Yeah? It was that a explain. Yes, that's 10 marks. You can do that, Tim. It's easy. 5 paragraphs done. Yeah. Yeah, good question. Okay, it's always hard to say because some people write really big, you know, and other people write really small. Yeah. So if you're talking 10 markers, then you've got to think about the time that you've got. So you've got 15 marks as well. All right, how long have you got for the exam? So therefore, marks per minute, 3. So 30 minutes here, and 45, 40. Yes. So this one you'd reduce down to about 20. This one you'd reduce down to about maybe 35. Right? So I write really quickly, okay? And not everybody does. Okay? And I understand that. I do. I sounded very Australian when I said that. I apologise. All right. Crikey! All right. So you've got to have, I would suggest, 2 A4 easy. In 20 minutes, you should be able to write two A4s. Easy. Yeah? All right. For 15 minutes, sorry, 15 marks, probably 3 to 4.
A4 back is front or like front?
Front.
Oh, okay, so 1 piece of paper.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. So an A4 sheet, front and back.
No plan.
All right. An A4 sheet, front and back, should be well possible here. Yeah. Up to 2 A4 sheets, front and back, should be well possible here. But again, that what I don't know, I mean, I don't. Sorry. All right. What I don't know is your writing size, your style of writing necessarily. I do know some. You know, big things for me is paragraphing, introduction, concluding, the actual written elements. That's what you need to also consider. You need an introduction, you need a conclusion. Okay, those are paragraph length. Okay, so that's 2 paragraphs out of your 5. Yeah, you're going to need to have 4 to 5 decent arguments, all right, with real life examples, potentially, where you can. So you can, and if you're doing diagrams as well, you're going to need to explain the diagram. Now, you don't really have a lot of diagrams at this stage. You've only got 1, but you will have a lot. 2. You're right, 2. Thank you. But you will have a lot. But anytime you include a diagram, your diagram needs to be a quarter of the page. All right, and don't write around the diagram. Okay? You have a diagram, then you write underneath it. Don't do diagram. Oh, look, there's space. I better fill that with text. Don't. Leave it clean. Yes, you can. At the moment, you can. Yes. When we start looking at the market model, I'm going to give you some rules about the labeling there. Yes. Yes, you can. Yeah, that's fine. When you do it for real, this is your pathway, okay? When you do it for real, then yes, the more pages you write, the better, okay? So I would then be preferring that you just write on one side, okay? And I would be preferring that you started a new question on a new sheet, absolutely. Yeah. So this, I mean, you got A and B. I mean, no, you know, I'm not hugely worried. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Right. Which is where it becomes a bit of a, you know. Yeah. Yeah. You don't need a lot. Yeah. At this stage, that's all you need. That is, I know it's only a couple of chapters, the sample chapters. What about, you could use, you could use 2 page equal sides and write it. So it's about your writing, how well does it write. So introduction, paragraph, introduction, paragraph, conclusion. And look at paragraphs. That's not the only issue you've got is this bit here. Yeah.
Is the modular resolution of the sequence that modular or a different modular?
Sorry, one more time. That one. And it was kind of a weird one because it happened at like 3 different parts of the world all at the same time. And it led to a very academic approach to economics, which is that idea of using econometrics, right? Which then you could make an argument connects economics even closer to science, because then it becomes more rigorous, more mathematical. Yeah. But, and you don't have to know this, then there's other philosophies of economics that say, no, right? The behavioralists, for example, that's too mathematical. You are not a human calculator. Therefore, we need to consider the psychology of who you are and not the maths. Yeah. Yeah, some might say aptitude as opposed to ability, but yes, you're right. Because it's supposed to predict forward as opposed to where you're at now, although parts of it are where you're at now. So, I got asked just before, so I'll say this to everybody. There are two different ways. Sometimes the language gets a bit confusing, but when you see things that say positive and normative statements, those are the statements that are used in economics or a science. So when we talk about positive and normative economics, then we're talking about the use of positive and normative statements. All right, that's what we're talking about. So they're the same things. Yeah, they're not completely different theories. Yes, that would be better. Yeah, or a positive use of data. Yes. Yeah, it's yeah. So normative economics will be using normative statements.
Right.
Positive economics will be using positive statements. Yes. Okay, one more time. Yeah, I was asking the question about the difference between words positive statement and normative statement and positive economics. The idea is that you are looking at positive economics using positive statements. That's just so you yeah.
Where would you like diagram? Like right at the start, or like and then start writing, or like But actually, like, if let's say you D, would you put it like where the actual diagram portion of the D, like after the example? Or would you implementing it right at the top and then start the show?
It's a style, isn't it? And an approach to writing that you're really referring to. The idea of the deed and the clasp and stuff, that's just checklists to see that you've done the things that you need to do. It's not necessarily saying do it in this order. So for paragraph, you're looking at an introduction paragraph, setting up your argument. Okay. Then you're going to have your first argument, which has its own introduction, then the argument, and its own little conclusion. You might then, particularly if it's an evaluation, you might then have a however statement, which introduces the next paragraph. All right, and in both of those, you might be including real examples, all right, to back up as evidence, to back up your points. Yeah.
I don't quite understand the use of logic.
Yes, so that's the ideas within science and the methodology approach. That you're using logic, so you're using what was the causation and correlation sort of idea, the idea of the triad here, where you've got three statements, each one is true because of the previous one. Yeah, that's sort of an idea. It's the scientific way of thinking. And because economics is attempting to be scientific, then we should start looking at the use of logic in what we do.
Yes, then the other one would be value judgments and policy making in the meaning of. Okay, I know the meaning of FG and value judgments and policy making.
Yes, we did a bit on that, and you wrote a bit on that. You had the data, and then you had to say, is it positive and is it normative? And then what's the point of that? And the idea is that the data talks about the values, okay? And then the values enables the politicians to set the targets. And then you're able to do the actual evaluating of how successful they are at meeting the targets using the scientific approach.
Right.
Yeah, so, which then becomes logical.
Right, so data sets targets for politicians.
Yes. So you can use the normative data as target setting, but your positive data is what you use to evaluate
the normative data.
The achieving the target set by the.
So achieving the normative.
Yeah.
So like when you're talking about the economics, the social science, and comparing it to the natural sciences, the main similarity was that how the methodology is worked out. But it's not exactly the same, but they still have hypotheses, the laws, testing, and repeatability.
Yeah.
So the main difference between them, is it the fact that economics and social science has bounded rationality?
Yeah, well, we include we have to include the psychology of the decision makers now we do. The classical approach said we didn't, but now we have to.
So the difference is that we have behavioral economics.
That's a difference, yes.
So what can be another type of difference?
Other types of differences, the way we use and the application of the concepts, the logical principles that we have, the laws and the hypothesis, and are they the same as a scientific approach? You know, mixing these two chemicals will create this. Well, that's repeatable. But in economics, it's not always repeatable. But maybe it's close.
Is that why you put like the bounded rationality
Yes.
and the repeatability together? Because sometimes you can't repeat economics.
Yes, and even if you do repeat it, you're repeating it with different consumers, and so therefore there's all the other assumptions that you're bringing in, like the utility experiment that you did, where you have to assume everybody has the same understanding of the utility.
But they don't.
No, you have to assume that they're all equally weighted in it. So we're not being scientific to the extent where that went out, right, was suggesting that you had to have exactly the same size of person doing the experiment. You know what I mean? You can't isolate for all of the conditions that you possibly could in a scientific experiment. those sorts of ideas.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mm.
So, let's say I'm doing a
Mhm.
as a data.
Yes.
And I want to get a feature of
Yes.
Can I draw, like, should I draw 3 different graphs or should I draw one big one and then?
It depends how many concepts you're wanting to illustrate. Yeah, you can illustrate a number with just one, but you've also got to be able to explain them. So it might be easier to illustrate a few and then have an explanation and then another diagram. And yeah.
So if I do, let's say I want to talk about how the PDF like shows represents one city.
Mm.
So I'm gonna do like one diagram, but do I have to do like do I have to do it as like big?
Yeah.
So still as big.
Yeah.
But
I wouldn't do one diagram just to illustrate scarcity.
so I should just do one diagram, illustrate all of them, and just talk about it later.
Yes. All right.
Can I color code my work?
Yes. Well, to an extent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shading and keys, all of those sorts of things. And when we get to what I was hinting at with regards to the statement Joel asked, which Joel asked about labeling, there will be some rules when we look at the market model about how to label.
Right now, it's like,
And right now, we're you can pretty much do anything.
我刚才在说通货账的时候，它这里有说特别太高了，空降比降掉了。然后这里是利润，一个加强竞争，可能利润效应可以降低。他只说了那句话，那些差的。
Yeah, the behavioral economics links all of those together because the problem with that classical way of thinking was that when they came across a behavior that they found to be irrational, right, put an answer. Even with the marginal and into the canes, when you start adding the maths and the rigor, then it's like, well, behaviorally, we are not calculators. So it fills in those gaps. So you can make an argument that behavioral economics makes economics more of a science than otherwise would, because otherwise there'd be too many laws that didn't work because people are irrational. According to classical theory, that's what happens. Or too many principles that wouldn't work even in the macro sense, because you'd have to do the maths behind it, or in the micro sense, and people can't compute maths. You're not sitting there going, well, my utility for this sandwich is this. I have this much money, therefore I need, you're not doing that. So therefore, behaviorally, why we find. Yeah, Marx is thrown in there because of the clash with the theories. He's just saying, you're wrong, right? He's actually a classical economist, as Karl. But all that he's saying is that you're wrong because the labour is having their value stolen from you. So therefore, he's against the market and capitalism. That side of classical thinking. Yeah, adding the maths to all of economics. And don't worry, we will do it. You haven't seen it yet. It's there. Hiding. Yeah.
It's my idea. Value judgment is correct.
Yeah, so you're using a value judgment to set the target, but what is it that they're trying to achieve?
So they're trying to satisfy this one.
Yeah, that's not an achievement. Yeah. So they set the target of lowering the taxes in order to generate income or growth. And then they're going to use the academics, they're going to use the your positive economics. You're then going to use it to work out, have they achieved that target? Not have we given everybody money, but has income risen, has employment risen, has growth risen?
Right. So it's like say like most people just even lower taxes because
Because it could lead to more income, jobs, and growth.
So you're supposed to set targets to reach higher income and growth, and put laws to reduce taxes.
So therefore, yeah, they're going to then use statistical analysis to check to see if the reduction in tax has caused the growth in the jobs that this theory predicted. Yes. Yeah. Actually, well, at the moment, I'm not so worried. If you do by accident, it'll be a happy accident. But your first two major themes, we've only just touched on now. And of one of those, we've got a bit of work to do on that in order for you to understand it. But when we do, then yeah, I'll be expecting it to come up a lot. Right. What is what? Structure inflation. Don't know. It's not a phrase I've heard before. Structural unemployment, I've heard, but structural inflation, not sure. And explain.
So I think I got it.
Yeah. Yes, a little line in the end. But yes, it's the right approach. Yeah. Because if you're using statistics, you're going to say you've achieved something or you haven't, and then you're going to be able to say how close you were to it. Yeah.
So to evaluate how close they were to achieving.
Yes. Mm.
Oh yes, I remember. Okay. So in reality, most businesses will sit on underneath it, just can't really get to the fullest efficiency.
Yes, most economies will be in here. Yes. And it's because of this idea here that you've got unemployment resources.
It's just like not using your FOPs.
Yeah. So anytime there's land that isn't being used efficiently, anytime there's people that aren't in the right jobs or aren't in jobs, anytime there's capital equipment just sort of lying around, and that's going to be a lot of the cases. Yeah. You might make an argument for Singapore as being pretty close to their PPC, I don't know. Yeah. Or Hong Kong, possibly.
So actual growth is from here to here, right?
Oh, I see what you mean. As opposed to potential growth.
Yeah. So that.
Yeah.
Just
You
like
could
minimum
probably make that as
resources
a,
and like
yeah, you
more
probably
existing
make that as a good argument.
What Joe was Lieutenant Joe was saying, still in the same, like, bottom level, upper right, just increasing the difference, right? Still-
Right.
Unusable.
失去疲劳，碰到要效果了，你就整个人就废了，不要碰我这种疲劳。就别人就跟不下去了。So I kind of get the idea of structure on inflation. Just saying also there's different sectors. So the wage is different. And so like the increased percentage of some people increase quite fast and someone else increase or decrease. So wage rate is also related to the price. So they have different
Why are you looking up? I don't see it. What is this in connection with? Change. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, when you write your PhD, yeah, worry about things to that level of depth. All right. Yeah, that's you really don't need to go there. You really don't. What would be more accessible to you is to have a look at Marxian thinking with regards to the progress of society and the rise of capitalism and the collapse of capitalism. That's more accessible. Why you would want to do that, I don't know. You don't need to. Yeah.
That's interesting information.
Yeah, it's not talking about inflation in the context of prices, which is what possibly is throwing you, and it certainly threw me when you asked me first. They're not talking about prices. They're just talking about the size. It should be really probably size or proportion or importance, any of those sorts of phrases. And it's talking about the different sectors within the economy and how they have grown and changed over time in relation to the economy. That's all. But yeah, you don't need anything like that. Okay? But if you're wanting to do research for a book, or if you're wanting to write your PhD thesis on Keynes and his thinking, I could give you a better Keynes discussion to do. Because he's written 2 books, yeah? Wealth of Nations and The Theory of Moral Sentiments. So what we discussed at the university was whether those 2 books, whether you could connect the 2 books or not. Because The Theory of Moral Sentiments is all about whether you can include other people's utility into your decisions. And the Wealth of Nations says everybody is selfish. So is he actually meaning one is not the other, because the Theory of Moral Sentiments is later, and the Wealth of Nations hasn't changed his mind, everybody is selfish, or did he always think everybody was selfish, but now he's come to the understanding that you're able to bring their utility into, yeah? So that's what we discussed at university, and that's something that you could write PhDs on. Sorry, start it again.
Yeah, it's like a one file.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, in the past we've referred to it as an assumption.
Yeah.
An assumption that we use in order to ensure that the law holds. The law of demand, the law of supply, in order for them to be a law in classification, as opposed to just a relationship,
So
then
oh, you guys
an assumption has to hold.
yeah. hold our theory together. Okay. Yes. Standard economics. This is the classical economics. This behavioral economics is the more recent. So are they both considered schools of thought?
Yes.
So
Now they are.
So in
Yes, you really don't have any classical thinkers anymore. You have what's called a new classical thinker, fashionable neo-classical. And those people were the Milton Friedmans, monetarists, how they're sort of now. So yeah, but yes.
so in so these are both skills of thought analysis, compare and examine.
Yes, but right, because this fills the gaps in the thinking that these guys came up with. So where they got stuck and said, well, this doesn't work, these guys came along and fixed it.
So like made it pioneer.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are some individual bullet points in your syllabus, yes. So for example, Say's law is mentioned specifically. Keynes is mentioned specifically. So there will be some economists that we will get to know. Yes.
I only remember how much John Maynard made, but we're not even doing Asian theory. Says is the guy.
Yeah.
So, but that's always the phenomenon. Come up and
Yeah. I mean, Adam Smith is the founder, so he's the principal architect.
how about like okay, because my biggest theory about economics is not like the theory itself, it's like writing it up.
Yeah.
Making a figure of the theory.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's pink stuff for your desks, there's blue stuff for your hands. As we hand them out my birthday corneta, have a fantastic afternoon break. And we'll see you when you come back. All the best, because you'll come back straight into exams. Please feel free to send me emails if need be. If you work out an answer and want me to give you some feedback on it, by all means, happy to do that. If you're stuck as to what something means, again, you can always ask. Thank you, team.